All right, welcome to our presentation. Today we will be discussing phantom limb pain. This image right here, really have no idea what this is about. Found it in one of my neuro videos. I don't know why Barbie here just wants you to ask her about her phantom limb pain. I don't know. It was interesting, so we decided to throw it in here. We just needed something to take up the space. Phantom limb pain is distinct from residual limb pain, which is pain in the limb that still exists. It is also distinct from phantom limb sensation, which is non-painful sensation in the absent limb. Phantom limb pain is specifically pain in the limb that is no longer there. There are a number of reasons for limb loss. About 1.2 million individuals in the United States every year have a limb loss. This is due to things like vascular disease, traumatic injury, diabetes mellitus, congenital defects, and malignancy. And phantom limb pain occurs in up to 85% of patients after amputation.
In general, phantom limb pain can be attributed to three major mechanisms: peripheral mechanisms, spinal mechanisms, and supraspinal mechanisms. As for the peripheral mechanisms, with a limb amputation, there is massive trauma to the residual tissues and residual neuronal damage. Nerve severing causes deafferentation, which can be defined as an interruption or destruction of the afferent connections of nerve cells to a specific body part, which in this case is the amputated limb. This trauma and pain attracts immune cells and inflammatory factors that cause sensitization of the peripheral nociceptive neurons. Following this, the severed nerve will begin regenerative sprouting, which may lead to neuromas, hypersensitivity, upregulation of voltage-gated sodium channels, and downregulation of potassium channels, all of which contributes to the spontaneous afferent inputs to the spinal cord, causing a perception of spontaneous sensations from the amputated limb. As for the spinal mechanisms, there is the increase in signal from peripheral sensitization drives the signal centrally, causing central sensitization of the dorsal horn cells. Similar to the peripheral sensitization, there is an increase in responsiveness of the neurons specific to neurons of the central nervous system. It is theorized that the excitatory peptide neurotransmitters within the dorsal horn are contributing to central sensitization by facilitating N-methyl D-aspartate, in other words, NMDA, receptor activity. This ultimately leads to a state of central hyperexcitability and hyperalgesia.
In addition to an increase in excitability, the central neurons experience a decrease in inhibition. The lack of afferent input to the dorsal horn causes a decrease in the descending inhibitory impulses from the brainstem. This corresponds with the concept that part of our pain control relies on incoming pain signals to activate our descending inhibitory systems. After amputation, the deafferenated peripheral pain-sensing C fibers, originally extending from the amputated limb, begin to degenerate. The body reacts to this degeneration with regenerative sprouting of intact afferents into the lamina associated with C fibers, that is, lamina 1 and 2, or the substantia gelatinosa. The light touch and proprioceptive sensing A beta fibers, which extend from the residual limb, peripheral afferents, begin sprouting from nearby lamina, that is 3 and 4, into the substantia gelatinosa. With this, the A beta fibers will synapse on the second-order neurons into the substantia gelatinosa, which trigger a pain signal from the previously amputated limb. The basis of the supraspinal mechanism is that there is a somatosensory cortical reorganization of the area representing the deafferenated limb. This is predominant with individuals experiencing phantom limb pain and phantom sensations. The tactile, proprioceptive, and nociceptive input is based on the limb's location on the somatosensory homunculus. One study showed that individuals with an upper limb amputation could experience phantom sensations by brushing their face ipsilateral to the amputation. On the picture to your right, you can see the somatosensory map of the entire body. Note that both the upper extremity and face are close to one another on the lateral aspect of the brain. Afferent input from the face and tissues near the residual limb take over regions of the brain that no longer receive afferent input. This could explain why afferent stimulation of a body whose cortical representation is adjacent to that of the phantom can produce sensations within the phantom, and is more likely to be impacted by cortical synaptic plasticity post-amputation. The greater the size of the deaffernated area and extent of cortical reorganization, the more intense the phantom sensations are.
According to the literature, nearly all amputees experience phantom limb sensation, but like we mentioned earlier, up to 85% of amputees experience phantom limb pain. There's a little disagreement in the literature, but the incidence of phantom limb pain is not found to be influenced by age, gender, the side of the body the amputation is on, the level, or the cause. It has been found that phantom limb pain is less common in children and congenital amputees. The onset of pain is typically within the first week after the amputation, with 45% of patients experiencing pain within 24 hours, 83% of patients experiencing pain within 4 days, and less than 10% experiencing pain after 1 week. This pain is described as shooting, squeezing, tingling, throbbing, stabbing, burning, or cramping, and episodes of pain duration can last from less than a minute to continuous in duration. The differential diagnosis of phantom limb pain is pretty straightforward. The patient must be missing a limb and experiencing pain in that limb that is no longer there. To help distinguish between residual limb pain and phantom limb pain, it is important to make sure there's no obvious tissue damage and that prosthetics fit appropriately and things like that. Basically, if someone is experiencing pain in a body part that no longer exists, it is pretty much phantom limb pain.
Pharmaceuticals are currently used to manage pain, but there's no known optimal pharmacological treatment method for phantom limb pain. This is due to the unclear specific pathomechanisms occurring in phantom limb pain. There is still a lot of ambiguity surrounding mechanisms, thus drugs are often used in combination and varying category. Antidepressants and sodium channel blockers are treatments of choice for neuropathic pain, but no controlled studies currently exist for these agents for phantom limb pain. Opiates and ketamine have been proven to be effective in reducing phantom limb pain in controlled studies so far. The drugs that can be used for phantom limb pain are listed and include opiates, anticonvulsants, NMDA receptor antagonists, antidepressants, botulinum neurotoxin injections, local anesthetics, and topical analgesics, and even a nerve block for temporary relief. Make sure to ask your patients before treatment if they had recently taken a dosage because this may affect your therapy session. Morphine is a strong analgesic that has been used for the relief of moderate to severe acute and chronic pain. Morphine can be administered various ways listed. Morphine causes the perception of pain to be altered in the spinal cord through descending inhibitory systems. This mechanism is through morphine being a mu-opiate receptor agonist coupled with G protein systems acting on the periaquedural gray. Here are the side effects. And next we have gabapentin, which is an analog of GABA, originally developed as an anticonvulsant, but also has efficacy in the treatment of painful neuropathies. The exact mechanism that allows gabapentin to work is not fully known, but it is believed to influence the production of GABA. Gabapentin also can cross the brain-blood barrier, making it an effective drug. Here are the side effects. And if the patient has taken a dosage of gabapentin before treatment, keep a close eye on them for adverse effects and stay in close proximity during gait training or balance exercises. And we have ketamine, which is typically used as a sedative hypnotic used to provide anesthesia for short diagnostic and surgical procedures, but low doses can be used for painful conditions. NMDA receptors are involved in central sensitization that are associated with chronic pain syndromes. NMDA antagonists, such as ketamine, may modulate central nervous system functions in binding to these NMDA receptors in the cortex and limbic system. This interrupts the pain and sensitization association pathways, causing significant pain relief, but induces serious side effects. That first effect is vivid hallucinations and psychosis that puts individuals in a dreamlike state. Hopefully, your patient will not take a dosage of ketamine before therapy, but if they do, please monitor them closely for these adverse effects.
For physical therapy, the overarching goal in the amputee rehabilitation process is to have all amputee patients function to the best of their ability in their daily lives, regardless if they are wearing their prosthetics. A huge barrier to achieving this goal is the presence of pain after amputation surgery. Due to the high prevalence of phantom limb pain in the amputee patients, it is critical for the physical therapist to use appropriate evidence-based interventions to help decrease the patient's pain. Mirror therapy, transcutaneous electrical nerve stimulation, and mental imagery are interventions physical therapists can use to appropriately treat patients with phantom limb pain. The first intervention is mirror therapy, which is an intervention physical therapists can use where the patient places their residual limb on the non-reflective side of the mirror and views their intact limb on the reflective side of the mirror. The image that is created in the mirror shows a replacement of the phantom limb. The patient then moves both limbs while looking in the mirror. It is believed that this intervention reduces phantom limb pain by minimizing the conflict between proprioception and visual feedback of the phantom limb. In a study performed by Chan et al., 18 lower limb amputee patients were randomly assigned to receive one of 3 treatments. The 3 treatments were mirror therapy using a covered mirror, or mental visualization. Patients performed their interventions once a day for 15 minutes under direct observation. Ultimately, mirror therapy was by far the most successful treatment in reducing patients' pain intensity, as well as pain episodes and their duration. Next, there is transcutaneous electrical nerve stimulation, also known as TENS, which is applied to the intact limb exactly where the patient reports pain on the phantom limb. TENS helps reduce phantom limb pain by sending afferent signals to fibers that pass through the corpus callosum. In turn, this will stimulate areas in the cortex that represent the phantom limb, which can ultimately reduce phantom limb pain. A study performed by Talek and colleagues applied burst TENS to 13 amputee patients on their intact limb for 20 minutes a day for 4 days. The current that was used was strong but comfortable and elicited no visible muscular contraction. After 4 days, patients who received TENS reported a significant decrease in pain. Lastly, mental imagery is an effective treatment that works by reducing the maladaptive reorganization in the cortex that is associated with phantom pain. A study by McIver et al. Was conducted observing the efficacy of mental imagery to reduce phantom limb pain in 13 upper limb amputee patients. fMRI scans were conducted prior to treatment, which showed an overlap between the hand and lip motor and somatosensory cortices. Patients attended 6 treatment sessions of 2 hours, where they performed relaxation training, as well as imagined comfortable movement and sensation of the phantom limb. As a result, a majority of patients reported their pain had been reduced by greater than 50%, and the fMRI scans showed decreased activation of the hand, motor, and somatosensory cortex with lip movements. For the interventions listed, it's important to note the small sample size of each study, and therefore the inability to conclude these treatments will be effective for large populations of patients with phantom limb pain. There is also conflicting evidence among the research regarding efficacy of interventions for phantom pain. When selecting interventions, physical therapists should consult current research and tailor their plans of care to each individual patient based on their current health status and pain levels. Lastly, contraindicated treatments for patients with phantom limb pain will vary based on the specific conditions a patient may present with. These may include health conditions such as cancer, decreased sensation, or a pacemaker. For example, in the image on the right, a patient is receiving TENS to reduce phantom limb pain. Therefore, the patient has been cleared for contraindications to electrotherapy. In addition to specific patient contraindications, movement of the residual limb must be cleared by the physician or surgeon before initiating exercises. And lastly, if the patient reports an increase in pain, intervention should be discontinued.
All right, thank you so much for listening to our presentation. Here are our references.